episode of First Down by CoachTools. Today we have a really exciting guest, Cody Alexander from Match Quarters. Thanks for coming on, Cody.
Yeah, appreciate being here.
Yes, sir. So Cody and I, we originally met, I believe it was just about 2 years ago, right?
Right. Yeah.
So he's the author of Match Quarters, which is a platform for in-depth defensive football content. So coming from experience working at Baylor University under coaches like Art Briles and Phil Bennett, he's put together this platform that's designed, like I was saying, for defensive football coaches. So without getting too detailed into it, can you just give the audience like a little bit of an overview of what Match Quarters is all about?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at the complexities of modern defense and how it's defending these modern offensive concepts with context, historical context, and just trying to make it simplified, right? Not simplistic, but simple. I want to be able to, I've been a teacher really my entire career. I see myself as an elite teacher. And so what I want to be able to do is take these concepts and then bring them to whether you are wanting to be kind of an advanced level fan, or you are a high school coach, or even a college or NFL coach. I have the whole gamut. I have everything from fans all the way to NFL coaches that follow me and interact with my work. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I want to be known as an idea guy. I'm not trying to tell you how to run a system or what to do. Most of my books are kind of guidebooks of, hey, these are things that are going on. This is how it's being taught. This is kind of my ideas on it. And then within historical context. And so just bringing that to coaches. And I think that's where the seed planting is what I want to be. I want to be a seed planter, not necessarily somebody that's telling you what to do and how to do it.
Got it. So since our audience right here are current football coaches and at the high school and college levels, how do you think would be like a good way for them to engage with your content, just to maybe learn a little bit?
Yeah, first of all, probably the best thing to do is just subscribe to my Substack. So Match Quarters at Substack, you can find it. You can go to matchquarters.com. There's links to everything there. But that would be the first step. If you really kind of want to understand who I am as a coach and my foundations and beliefs as a coach, I've got 2 books that I would start out with. First, I would start out with Match Quarters. The self-titled book basically goes through my process of why I run quarters, how I teach it from A to Z. It has a glossary index, because the other thing that I never want to do, I never want to assume people know my language. Like I call cloud to me is to read. I learned that under Phil Bennett and I've kept it. Sky is quarters, so I don't want to ever assume that people understand that. But that, and then Cautious Aggression, which was my very first book that I wrote kind of as leaving Baylor and kind of understanding, hey, I'm probably going to be at the high school level. I wanted to debrief on my time there defending what I still think is one of the best offensive schemes in all of football. So I would start there. I would start with those 3 things.
Got it. So can you talk a little bit more about that experience with Coach Briles and Bennett from Baylor?
Yeah, it was amazing. You talk about coming in at the exact right time. When I came into Baylor in 2011, 2010 had not been a very successful year. They went to a bowl game. It's successful in their mind. For Baylor, going to a bowl game was a really big deal, but they went to the bowl game. They didn't really perform as well as they wanted to. They knew they had a quarterback. They had a special quarterback in Robert Griffin. And so being there in 2011 was really interesting. It was the last year of the original Big 12. I actually got to coach and be at Kyle Field for one of the last times ever for Baylor. And so that year was a really interesting year because that's RG3's Heisman championship year. So it was a really interesting year to get in. It was Phil Bennett's first year. So he hadn't been established yet. Some of his support staff that he had brought along, he didn't necessarily know how they work. Art Briles is notorious for not having a huge staff. These huge staffs that you see in the SEC and even at the Big 12 level right now, that didn't even exist. Like Art Briles ran a completely skeleton crew. We had the bare minimum amount of support staff. He just didn't want a lot of people around. So being able to get in right then, I was lucky, again, being at the right place at the right time. I met Phil Bennett, who was, very open to having me in meetings. Casey Horney, who's now a high school coach, but he's been around. He was at Florida International. He was at Texas. He kind of started feeding me things to do. Next thing you know, 4 games in, I'm running the scout team. I'm doing all of our opponent breakdowns. The NCAA
Wow.
in the spring of 2012 implemented the 4GA rule. So now you get 4GAs, which was allowed me. I had worked for free that entire year, that was the expectation. I tell guys all the time, like, you have to, in this job, at some point, you're going to have to work for free. It's just, it is what it is. That's how you get your foot in the door. So I was lucky enough to get into grad school, work for free for a year, and then they gave me a graduate assistant when the NCAA did that. Now, you talk about timing in this profession, most people understand that you don't move up as a young coach unless somebody leaves, right? And so I had a kid when I was a GA, which I don't recommend. We're in the middle of spring practice. I had my first son, Duke, in the middle of spring practice. And so it was kind of like my wife and I are like looking at each other, and it's like, do we really want to move around? And in this profession, you have to take kind of that low paying job. And then boom, that's when you finally get the job. Right. Well, having a kid and having a wife who's from Texas, we live in Texas, you can make, it's really hard to tell your wife, hey, we're going to take this $30,000 job in Atlanta, and you're going to have to get recertified as a teacher in Georgia with whatever that means. I have no idea where I'm going to live or what we're going to do. And then turn around and be like, hey, down the street, you can make $75,000 and just be a teacher and a coach. So that was kind of the experience.
Gotcha. No, that's really interesting. So I guess it seems like match quarters is your way of staying involved in the game, but kind of sharing your knowledge and your experience from Baylor.
That's how it started. Right.
Yeah.
And really, I had no intentions of ever writing. I was 2 years out of being at Baylor, and one of my good friends where I'm at Lovejoy, we have a very successful year. We go 2 rounds deep in the playoffs. I thought we did really well. I'm getting everything set up. I was going to be the defensive coordinator the next year. That was kind of the plan. And so I'm getting everything set up. I'm prepared. I come in from Thanksgiving break, head coach gets fired. These are things that you don't know until you get there. The politics of things, the AD and the head coach don't like each other. These are things that you don't necessarily, you kind of feel, but you don't know how much. And so by him getting fired, we weren't necessarily, again, financially, we weren't able to just be like, hey, let's just pick up and move somewhere in Dallas and get a job and everything. And, we had just kind of gotten settled down. And so for my wife and I, it was like, I really want to stay. So by staying, the head coach wanted me to be there, but by staying, I was going to have a very much limited role. I had all these creative juices that I had from Baylor that I had ideas of I wanted to do as I was developing at the high school level. And so I was like, look, I'm just going to put it on the worst place you could possibly put it, which is the internet. And so we'll see. And luckily from there, that has been the genesis for the last 7 years. People enjoy it. They like it. I don't make everybody happy, which is okay. But I adhere by the Cunningham law, which is that, if you want the right answer, put the wrong one on the internet and somebody will tell you the right answer. So I'm not a genius. I don't know everything, but I do enjoy doing it. And it's kind of turned into this thing. It's allowed my wife to, kind of work from home, and then it's allowed me to kind of travel around. And now I don't even coach anymore. I consult with coaches, and then write full time.
Wow, that's really cool. So going off of that, like, how do you see the role of social media and online platforms being a mechanism for sharing football knowledge?
Yeah, I think the assimilation of information is so much faster now. You can't hide anymore. Your tape's not going to get hidden. You know, you're even at the high school level, your kids are going to share their highlights because you have to market. It's a necessary evil. You know, I was talking to somebody the other day and I was like, I would love to not just be on social media at all. But if you do that, you're dead in the water. You can't, there's no way that you can expand. Everything is marketing. And that's just the society that we live in. Everything that you do is marketing, whether it's an appearance on a radio show or doing a podcast like this, or creating your own content. Everything that you do is marketing, and it's putting eyes on you. I just feel like it's how you approach it. You know, I try not to be, when I get home, I try not to be on social media at all. I try and do all my social media in the morning. And then throughout the day. And then, you know, if I need to answer questions or emails, I'll do it in the morning. But I think as a coach, you have to embrace social media. It is what it is. I think now you can find a younger coach. You can find kids nowadays that will be your social media managers, that will run your social media accounts. There's so many now with AI tools and different things like that, just to create simple graphics that are good, that are decent for your kids. So I think social media as a platform, it's a necessary evil. You have to be at the forefront. And I even think of it like this, you know, and my dad's a longtime high school coach, but he's always talked about how facilities and presentation and who you are as a team. And I mean, he's talked about this since the early 2000s, like before social media. It's because before it was just word of mouth, but you have to show what your program is. That's how you get parents to move into your district. That's how colleges get kids interested in their program. And so that presentation alone is what is putting butts in the seat, right? And getting kids into your district. And some of these coaches that have to recruit their players, they have to get into the middle schools. They have open enrollment districts. If you're not using social media, then you're not getting eyes drawn to you. You do have to create a hype machine. It's just your responsibility to make sure that hype actually matches the production on the field.
Yeah, it really is so true. And especially in like today's technology age, it's like everything you do, it's not that you have to post about everything, but it is really, really important just to have some type of presence online, and especially in the football realm on Twitter specifically. So that's really interesting. And then before we were talking in this conversation, I remember we mentioned something about the Data Bowl. So can you just talk a little bit about that and in your experience, because you were in Germany, right?
Well, I flew from Germany, so that's kind of one of the wild things of when I decided I was going to quit coaching. It was probably the most scariest decision I've had to make. I really wanted to take my time making that decision. Match quarters. I like I said at the very beginning of this, I see myself as an elite teacher, and whether that's in the classroom teaching U.S. history or government, or that's out there on the field teaching defensive back play or calling a defense. So for me, it was when I told myself initially, when match quarters got in the way of the classroom, I would either quit match quarters or I would quit teaching. And so match quarters, I feel like is kind of this upward trend. I had kind of COVID was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. It really showed how hard I was working, and that I needed to really readjust how I saw football in my life and how it fit within my family life. And so having that time, so that's where that ended up. But since I've quit, I mean, I've got to travel to England. I've got to travel to Germany talking football. I've gone to the Combine, like you said, the Big Data Bowl. I've gone and visited several different colleges, other places, and just in the opportunities that I've had, because I have time now to entertain those, has been there. But to go back to the Big Data Bowl, the NFL and analytics, analytics is this kind of this buzzword, and most people think that it's like, do you go for it on fourth down, or do you go for two, like clock management things? It's much more than that. And the NFL has really made a push in the past 5 years to really create. They want NFL teams to make the game better through analytics, smarter through analytics. You and coaches understand this. There's a lot of guys that if you were to be like, hey, this is a foundational belief that you have, but can you tell me why you have that? Or is there any data to back that up? And a lot of guys in football, they can't tell you that. They're like, well, it's the crippling term of, well, that's the way we've always done it. It's like my son, his youth football team, they run a lap at the beginning of every practice, like they did in the 70s.
Yeah.
And it's like, why are we running a lap? You don't run a lap in football. Like that's not, but
right.
That's what they did in high school. That's what we've always done. We've always at Little League done it. And a lot of times it's just because they're not prepared and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do for practice. And so go run a lap. But the NFL wants departments to have analytics in it and not just go for it on fourth down, but when one of the things that we did in my team was we created a pass rush expectancy. So by horizontal and vertical distance using GPS data from the NFL, we could tell you how likely that person was going to blitz or they were going to rush the passer. On top of that, we could use historical data that on player. This is the thing that the NFL, this is why the NFL is you can get really even crazier. The college Power 5 level will eventually have this because they're starting to get the catapult and the GPS data as well. But we can then go historically, that player, we can look at in that positioning how often they did rush the passer. So we actually could do it off of where you get this is linebackers. If he's mugged in this gap, he has this percentage of blitz. If he's mugged in this gap, that percentage could go up or could go down. And so you can set your protections off of this. I'll never forget, I had an NFL analytics guy come to me and he goes, I can take this right now. I can walk into a meeting room tomorrow and I'm not going to get my head chopped off, because that's the biggest problem right now with analytics is there's no bridge builders. You have to use the term nerds, right? You have these math guys that don't really know football that are creating these models and situations and doing this. And then you have these coaches over here that are looking, and there's nobody in between that's like, hey, what do you need at the coaching side? What can I help you develop? And then going over here and helping to build those models. Or, hey, this is this really cool model that we have from the analytics side. This is actually how you can use it. And having that football presence of being able to talk football language. Language is such an important part of communication. Storytelling is such a big part of communication, and how you tell that story, and it is going to affect the way that people listen to it. And so being involved in the Big Data Bowl was really cool. And you talk about coming from Germany. So I had to fly from Munich all the way to Indianapolis. That was like a 20-hour day because I'm going back the opposite direction. So it was a long day, but it was a great experience and kind of opened the door for me to talk to NFL people and get involved in the NFL. And that, I think, is where college coaches, that's where the trickle down will come. College coaches to then high school coaches is being able to use analytics to make smarter decisions on game day.
Yeah. And that's the key thing, is that there's no, like you were saying, there's no bridge between the information and how you can actually apply it, and being able to understand how you can actually use that information is really what's going to make analytics into, and I think it's only going to get bigger. I think that's what's going to make it huge. And even like you were saying in the high school and potentially even in the like high school levels too.
Yeah, so I think the biggest, the simplest thing right now, if I'm a high school coach and I'm like, well, how can I do analytics? What's the simplest way that I can just at least see production from analytics? What I would do is create a simple efficiency model, right? And so for defense, I created this a couple years ago when I was at Horn, because the guy I worked with was a math guy, and he goes, there's got to be a way that we can get some of this analytics. So we decided, let's come up with a simple efficiency model. In fact, if you use Huddle already has it in there. It's called the EFF. It's the efficiency model. So on first down, did you hold the offense to 3 yards or less? Did you create a 2nd and 7 or more? If you did, you get a win, right? It's 1. It's just a win rate, right? So what you're creating is these simple win rates. What you can do off of that is pair them with the calls that you make. You're already tracking what calls. You already have somebody in the box or on the sideline tracking what the calls are. You're taking that down and distance data. You're tagging it with the call, and then you can then manipulate it. On first down, our win rate was this. On second down, our win rate was this. On second and medium, on second and long, on second and short, on third and long, you can break everything down. Fourth down, then you can go to field zones, red zones, because you already have this data in Huddle, right?
Right.
So you already have this data from your somebody charting it. So then what you can do is pair that with calls. And so what we were able to do at Horn was we could take our calls and say, okay, is it the player or is it the coach or is it the scheme? Is it the player? We're asking him to do something he just can't do. Is it the coach? We're not teaching a concept right. Or is it the scheme that, hey, this on paper looks really good, but in action, it's not working. Or we're not using it. Hey, when we call this call on first down on a 50-50 down, it's not really that great. Our efficiency isn't very good. But man, when we call this on third down and we dress it up a bit, it hits home every time. I'll never forget, I was talking to a friend of mine. His name's Will Wyndham. He's kind of the one that gave me an idea of this. He's a coach with Southern Alabama, who is one of the best G5 defenses in college football. Kane Womack does a really good job down there. But we kind of talked about this analytics part, and they had kind of done something similar when he was at Penn State. And so we're talking about how then in the off season, you can say, okay, look, our trap twos were really good. We don't have very many of them. Maybe we need to develop more trap twos, and that needs to become more part of our scheme. Whereas, hey, we really struggled with a lot of cover one. Our fire zones didn't really work. Our 3-under-3 deep calls didn't really work as much. Maybe we need to create more change up, or maybe we're showing it. And so you can either pare down or add to your scheme each year. And that's just off of literally a simple efficiency. Where on first down, did we hold them to under 3? On second down, did we hold them to under half? Right. And then on third down, did we win? On fourth down, did we win?
Yeah.
And if you do that, I think that that's the simplest way that you can do analytics.
Yeah. And I think it's the analogy I always like to make is like, it's kind of like if you're trying to save $100, you're putting $1 in the bank every single time. You might not put $100 in the whole time, but it's these stacking these little wins every single time so that eventually you're going to have the information that you need to make your program better, you know?
Yeah. And I think if you've been at a program for several years, right, you've already got all these game data. You can create, a full cut up, and then you can go back in now and create historical. Hey, when we make this call, 3 years ago, it was really good and it's trending downwards. Why? Our team's doing something different. Did our ecosystem change? Did a couple of teams get new offensive coordinators or vice versa? And I think offensively, you can do this as well, because I think a lot of times coordinators are just calling plays, right? You don't want to be a play caller. You want to be a coordinator. You want to make sure everything's fitting and doing correctly, and it's being taught correctly, and everything's fitting together. You don't want to just call plays because I anchored myself from the system. I talk a lot of times, and I'm a big fan of like cognitive biases. And we are so anchored to a lot of things that we learned first. And so trying to get away from that and trying to move on from that or trying to, what I always tell young coaches all the time is learn a system first, learn it first. Okay. Get all of dot the I's, cross the T's, then try and prove it wrong every year. And what ends up sticking over time, that's best practices. And there's just certain best practices in football that it doesn't matter where you are. Like on offense, the flood concept, you can run that concept at every level of football and it's going to work. You just have to dress it up or make it look different. And so I think that to me are things that as a coach, we can use analytics to help us make better decisions on, are we teaching something wrong? Is a scheme or a kid or even player development?
Yeah, no, that just, it makes so much sense. And like you were saying, I think that information is what's going to help coaches like bridge the gap. So before we hop off here, Coach, is there anything else you wanted to share with the audience here, advice wise, or just anything in general?
Yeah, I just think be curious. Be curious. I think that's the biggest thing. I see it all the time. Things get stale and you get caught. Be curious about it. Always ask, can I do better? Look inward, look at yourself first before you look at the kid. How am I? I always say all the time, I remind myself and coaches all the time, kids win in spite of us, not because of us. The only person that created a player was his parents. As a coach, we can try and maximize the talent that player is given, but at the end of the day, a lot of it is transactional relationships. I'm telling you what to do, you do it. Hopefully, you're successful with it, right? Go beyond transactional relationships. Try and build those relationships. Explain the why. I think one of the things with this generation that is better than any generation prior is that they are willing to ask why. And because of that, that's where you get the buy-in, right? You get the buy-in because they're asking why and you're explaining why. The kids nowadays don't want to hear, well, that's the way we've always done it, or because I said so. Okay, coach, you're telling me to do this, but why am I doing this? And I think that if you can meet them at the front end and explain the why first, it makes things a lot simpler. And I think it also exposes you as a coach. If I can't explain the why, then I better figure out why we're doing this. And if I can't explain it, then maybe we need to reevaluate it and see, is this something that we really should be doing within our program? And so to me, that is the biggest thing. And that is the biggest advice that I try and give coaches when I talk to them is just, hey, understand the why, understand the nitty gritty, be a technician. Fundamentals still matter in football. It's still about hitting and tackling and being physical at the point of attack. And that will never change. Like I said, there are certain things in football that are never going to change. In the fundamentals, if you don't have those schematics, great. Look, I'm probably the poster child for this. I can paint a really pretty picture on PowerPoint of a scheme. But if you can't explain it and you can't coach it and you can't get your coaches that are underneath you to coach it, then it doesn't really matter. It's just a pretty picture sitting on your screen. So I think, as much as, hey, look, I got this new playbook, or hey, I got this playbook from this college or this system. At the end of the day, can you teach it? Can your coaches coach it? And that's probably the most important thing.
Gotcha. Well, very, very good advice, Coach. And for anybody else who wants to get in touch with Coach Alexander, it's just at Match Quarters on Twitter.
That's at Match Quarters on all social media. On Twitter, it's at _coach_A. But if you type in Match Quarters, it'll pop up.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you again, Coach. And thank you everybody for watching.